Faces of children in the late 1890s. Faces both of hope and faces that reflected the reality of a hard life. What events did these faces see? Did they serve in World War I? How did they manage through the Great Depression? And were these the faces of labor activists? What do you suppose their stories are? Hi, I'm Chuck Arning, National Park Service Ranger here in the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And the key to developing a family history is trying to go back and learn the stories behind each of the faces. Now, that's not an easy task, but today we're going to meet some people who've managed to do just that. And they're going to show us how they went about it. So get ready for some really great stories, but you might want to take a few notes, because I have a sneaking suspicion that the next family that learns about its history may very well be yours.
Telephone put in our house because nobody had a phone back then. And because he worked for New England Power, he had a phone, and they would call him in the middle of a snowstorm in the winter or a thunderstorm in the summer. He would walk from our house down to the mill and turn the switches that were not working and, bypass so that they could get the electricity running again. And in the middle of a storm, and I swear to this day that's why I hate thunderstorms, is because he would go out in the middle of a storm and walk down to Fisherville Mill to do this little chore he had.
Everything was shut down, even the schools were closed. And there was no gathering, the movies, no movies. And I remember when I was thinking, if we had an epidemic now to kill 500,000 people, we wonder, and that's how many died. Really? There was one family that lived about 1.5 miles from me, 5 of them, they all died in 1 week. And my parents got sick, and unfortunately I didn't get sick, but I was worried to death I was going to lose my parents, because people were dropping like flies.
In fact, we were around here when they brought the first people up to unionize the mills. They unionized mills in Southbridge and Worcester before they came out to the outlying towns. They felt we were the easy pickings, we'd be scared, and we were. We were scared. That would have been 1938 probably. And we were scared stiff. We really were, because here were these big trucks carrying loads of men handing out cards for you to give out, and we didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't like him. My father did. He said it was the future of the industry. I said it was the end of the industry, so I don't know. You can take your pick.
Especially members of the band, the Cape Verde Ultramarine Band, if any member of our family passed away, we were automatically supposed to go and play for the funeral. And in them days, you would have to march from we'd say we're leaving the church, which is the last right before you go to the cemetery. We would follow from the cemetery all the way up Allen Street, which is in New Bedford. And we used to go there, march going, and actually sometimes we wouldn't march back, but most of the time we did, And it became something that we did with any member of the family, We did it when my mother passed away.
The kitchen has always been the centerpiece of the American home. It has a certain warmth I think we all can identify with. From the colonial times to the present, the kitchen has been a gathering place for friends and family as we prepare food, mend clothes, swap stories, and also make plans for the future. Now we're standing in the original kitchen of the Waters Farm here in Sutton, Massachusetts. This kitchen goes back to 1757, and can you imagine what stories this kitchen could tell? Matter of fact, many family and cultural traditions center around the preparation of food, and the kitchen is a great place where you can capture a lot of family stories. So I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to track down Ranger Suzanne Buchanan, Donald Malloy, and Mrs. Messier and learn how to make French-Canadian meat pies.
Hi, this is Ranger Suzanne Buchanan here in Cumberland, Rhode Island. I'm here with Donald Malloy, otherwise known as the Meat Pie King of the Blackstone Valley. And today, Donald, we're talking about French traditions, or traditions that families pass on to each other for the holidays. And a tradition that we'd like to talk to you with our viewers is about the French tradition of making a tortilla.
I really, really love the tradition. I mean, it's not everybody that can do it because it takes years and years of experience. Of course, I don't.
In a good recipe.
In a good recipe, right? And I really don't measure anything except the potatoes and the meat, but we just add the spices and ingredients, and you just go by the aroma.
Oh, and the smell is so good.
It started, I would say, in the 1940s. My father had his own place in Pawtucket. He used to make the French meat pies there. And of course, they used to sell them to the public. And of course, Christmas Eve night, all the family used to come up, the restaurant, and we used to have the French meat pies. And of course, the men would have their liquor, and the woman would bake the pies. Of course, my father would make the pies, but the woman would take care of feeding and serving, the men and the children. Most of the time now, there's both the wife and the husband that work. And plenty of times, in the evening, especially in the evening on the way home from work, they'll pick up a meat pie and a few other items, and that's it. They call me, some of them call me their chef.
Yeah.
Because it's already cooked for them. And of course, we have a lot of elderly people that come down from the Blackstone Valley, Woonsocket, and they enjoy it. They say it's just like their memes.
Yeah.
It's very, very good. Of course, we have people that come down here from vacation, and they take pies home, like from Florida to North Carolina, New Jersey, and before they go home, they love them so much because they don't have them out there, and they bring them home with them.
So they take a piece of the Blackstone Valley back with them, and they get to enjoy it.
Yeah, they have tradition in Florida.
Okay, I'm ready, Donald.
Okay, let's go, Suzanne. We're going to show you how to make the bottoms here. Almost perfect, Suzanne. You're doing fine, Suzanne.
All right.
You're doing fine.
My second career.
Yeah. Your mother will be proud of you. We put 1.5 pounds of mixture in the pie.
And this is the final mixture.
This is the final mixture. Potatoes,
pork, onions,
and everything, seasoning and everything. Now remember, always go very light on the roller. That's good.
This is a big project to make.
It's a big project at home, and it makes a mess at home.
Yeah.
That's why my wife never lets me cook in the kitchen, because I make a mess. Okay, Suzanne, now we're going to show you our finished product.
Mm-hmm.
And let's show our viewers what we got.
Which one's mine? They all look so good.
A couple of pieces of pie here for you.
Boy, that smells sure
I
good.
used to make mine the day before and get everything ready
Right.
for Christmas Eve or New Year's was a big day for tortilla.
Right.
Yeah.
And they still do it now. There we go, Suzanne. And
Smells good.
here we go. Is that all right if I call you Meme?
Oh, I am a meme.
And a
Congratulations.
Vietnamese.
A Vietnamese.
I'm a great grandmother.
Ça, c'est beau.
Très bien.
Très bien, merci.
Oui.
Okay, now I'm going to have you eat the pie and try it out.
Okay, Don, is it okay if I use ketchup?
It's a symbol you can use ketchup.
Okay.
Are we going to let her use ketchup, Meme?
If she'd like.
Okay.
They were tortillas were very popular, amongst the French Canadians. It was an economical meal also. And especially at New Year's, this is when I would have them all in my house until the house got too small for all that
And the family
gang,
too big.
And the family too big. But the old uncles used to go around at Christmas, not Christmas, at New Year's mostly, and they would sing. Réveillon. Réveillon in French means wake up. So they'd wake up their friends, which would allow them to come into their home for little snubs, you know? And then they'd go on to the next neighbors. And then this is what they would feed them, is the meat pies, the toutier. My mom, yeah, she was French-Canadian from Saint-Pierre-de-Guienne in Quebec. No one makes toutiers the same. Like if you lived in a different district in Canada, you would make them different. But she was from Quebec, and this is the recipe of the ground pork, more pork than Hamburg. But then there's the Canadians' pie they call meat pie, which is just half and half.
And everyone had their own different flavor.
Yeah. Some were terrible too.
Not this one.
Some would put too much, pork. You should really use lean pork.
Yeah. Well, have a taste of my meat pie that Donald showed me how to make.
Oh.
I think if you closed your eyes, you'd think that you would taste in one of your own pies, Mom. Sure smells good. Well, we'll keep the tradition going.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good.
And we hope that you'll keep your tradition going in your family. This is Ranger Buchanan wishing you a happy holiday.
I love the New Year's tradition because it stems from the Cape Verde Island, which they call the Cantares, is where the musicians come together and they visit different homes. Every home is opened on New Year's Eve. Every home in New Bedford was open, hopefully that the musicians would choose their house to come to, and they would have the guitar and the violin and the maracas and the accordion. They'd have all the Cape Verdean instruments, and they would come to the house, and our parents would always have food, popcorn, the Cape Verdean liquor, and the grog, and the wine, and the different kind of Cape Verdean pastries to welcome into the house, and they'd have a toast for the wealth and the health and the prosperity of the family, and they always sang a Cape Verdean New Year's song, which is Boas Fastas, Boas Honours, meaning Happy New Year's. It was very, very festive, and they'd play the music, and everybody would have a toast.
If the truth be told, it's not a stretch in the imagination to understand that family and cultural stories and legends teach fundamental truths about life. How to treat others, honesty, the value of hard work, in a word, values. Family stories and legends teach values.
One of my all-time favorites, you may have heard it many tribes, particularly in New England, about a group of little people that live in the woods. Under each tribe has a different title for them, and some have individual names, others is the Pegussets, Pequakis, different words. Small, miniature people, and they were usually, maybe, I guess everyone visualizes them as elderly, but sort of like well-proportioned dwarfs or something, but really tiny, 8 or 10 inches tall. Well, there was this character in our legend is Granny Squanah, and she lives out in the woods and is very poor and has very little to do with. So whenever people had more than they could consume to eat, you would take it out and leave it in the woods for Granny Squanah. Well, you don't know how many hours I probably spent watching for Granny Squanah to come looking for food and leaving peanuts, junk food, you name it, anything that might be edible, and sitting, I learned patience, sitting quietly and thinking, please, Granny, please, God, I want you to have something to eat. The teaching behind it now is that you don't waste, and of course, even if it's not little people, you are contributing something to the wildlife, or at least it's going to go back into Mother Earth. So the story, the legend of Granny Squanah and the little character, you can tell that to children and they relate to it and they see a purpose in sharing, in not wasting if you have too much, and not over-consuming, that concern for others that are less fortunate. All of that is encapsulated in a little silly little legend about an old lady called Granny Quanah.
Me being involved and doing all these hands-on things that my grandfather and my father had me doing, working in the picker house. When somebody was out in the card room, I'd have to go downstairs in the card room. Even though I didn't know the job, there was nobody else there. Yeah, you're running these. And I'd go down, oh my God, you know, what do I do? The ends would fall out, and I'm looking around, I couldn't find them. I had to shut the machine off and get a flashlight. Oh, geez, there it is. Now how do I get it out? I start the machine back up and get the yarn out, and that's how I learned. A lot of it was self-taught. I'll tell you one more thing about my grandfather. This always rings true to me today. When there was a problem, and I would be standing there and look at it, my grandfather would say, just don't stand there and look at it, try something. If it doesn't work, well then you know it doesn't work, put it back. And it carries through today. Everything I come to a problem, I remember those words of my grandfather ringing in my ears, try something. And it was good because, you know, installed a sense of quality, and things had to be done, and had to be done the right way, because our reputation was on the line on every pound of yarn that we produced. And, you know, it's really paid off, you know. I really love my grandfather. I really respect him for, you know, the things that he taught us.
At this time of year, we have what's called Nakoma, which has come to mean the giveaway time. But Nakoma is also a spirit that dwells in the wood. He's a male and an older man that is quite old and decrepit, but able to get around very good. He's just skin and bones and long flowing hair. But when people are hungry, he guides if people are out hunting, he'll guide them to where there's game, or women out looking for berries, he'll either send a bird or something to call and let them know where there are blueberries, elderberries, or something to pick. With fishermen, he'll guide them to a section of the lake where they're biting good. And that's how he came to be sort of blend in with the Santa Claus image, but ours is year-round. Because of the goodness and care and protection that Nakoma provides, almost any ceremony where there's dancing and it's traditional always. People, anyone who has something that they're either not using or a child outgrew or something, you bring for a giveaway. And you know, that sometimes the word Nakoma covers that. So it's a multi-purpose word, but it stems from the character Nakoma, who dwells among the evergreens and leads hunters to game and foragers to food. They introduce characters that become really, in a way, lifetime friends. Adults realize they're pretty much imaginary characters, but imaginary in the sense of there isn't a physical being, and yet they're not imaginary because that spirit, and spirit in the sense of, as we say, giving is a spirit, that feeling, that desire that develops within a person because of the knowledge of, say, Nakoma or Granny Quanah. That was another issue where the colonists would think of them as heathen gods. They worship those people. And it wasn't a case of worshiping them. To leave, you know, something to eat out in the woods wasn't bringing frankincense and myrrh like the Christ child. It was an offering, a donation to someone who was not as well off as you were yourself.
Losing of a loved one is always difficult. It brings home the reality that we live a very fragile existence. The passing of a loved family member brings on a flood of emotions, and very often those emotions come in the form of family stories. Now we're going to meet one family, the Farrell family, and learn how they took a personal tragedy, the loss of their mother, and turned it into an opportunity to collect a lot of family stories and family history and turn it into a living memorial. We're here at the Bancroft Memorial Library in Hopedale, Massachusetts, with the head librarian here, Elaine Malloy. And Elaine has one of those wonderful stories that work very well with genealogy and family stories, because Elaine, you took this personal loss and turned it right around into a triumph almost. Can you tell us how you did that?
Yes, my mother was always a great storyteller. My earliest memories were her relating stories to me of her childhood. And when we received the news that she indeed would not be around too much longer, I had frantically started to write things down in a feeble attempt to keep her with me. Along the way, her sisters were visiting her near the end, and when they'd get together, it was always, "Do you remember this? Do you remember that?" And one of them said to me one day, "Gee, all our memories will be forgotten." And that was the inspiration I needed to do something about it. And I realized that you could preserve your history in 3 ways, either on audio cassette, you can video, or you could write down your memories, and realizing that the audios and videos do have a shelf life. You have to be prepared to make backups if you're going to go that route. But loving books as I do, I decided I'd use the written word. And so I produced a book about my mother's family, and we called it Memories of a Blackstone Valley Family, the Farrow Years.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah. My mother was raised in South Grafton, as you know, and there's a lot of mill stories and just life in general. She was the oldest of 8, and they had a lot to tell. One of my aunts tells a story in here of her sister being a patient at Children's Hospital in Boston, and it cost $7 a week. Well, one of my favorites in here is the one about my mother. I have her pictures from her first communion, and I always thought her veil was kind of overwhelming for a little girl. In just 2 sentences, I learned the story. My first communion veil was my mother's wedding veil, and she made it over for me, and I thought that was kind of neat.
Wipe their looms off. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But it was. It was cheaper for them to tear off a length than to buy material to wipe off the machinery. Yes. During the war, my father worked at Wesconut, and they used to give him a lot of material, you know, because he had all these great big turbines and everything. So my father used to get me material, and I used to make the girls' coats, little suits, little jumpers, little skirts. And but all this was stuff they were going to throw away.
Now, how did your family react to having the book?
Very well. I interviewed each of them, each of my aunts and my uncles, just prior to my mother's death, and I collected 80 pages of notes, and I told them I wanted to do this. They were all very receptive to the idea. They kind of forgot about it, to tell you the truth, because over a year went by before I could even look at it. And the first thing I did, I took their stories and wrote them into coherent sentences. Then I organized them, trying to go by subject, different memories of the Depression, Christmases they had, and it's just even something as simple as a Sunday afternoon, what they would do. And
that must have been hard. It must have been emotional.
It was. I couldn't, as I said, I couldn't even look at it for a year because I cried every time I looked at it. But afterwards, you could. My mother is alive in this book, and now her sisters are alive in it too, and her brother. And so their memories will live on.
That's the point.
It's really easy, and I would encourage anybody to do it. I think preserving your own family history for whatever reason is one of the most important things you can do. After
I wrote up the stories. I just taped them onto paper so I could sort of get an idea of the layout. And then when I had certain other things that I wanted to put in the book, I shifted the text around. Sometimes when you do a book, you could put any pictures you might have at the end of it. You might have a couple pages in the middle of your book reserved for photographs. I like them with a story. And I found that all I had to do was move the text down and you could put them in. And I think it's very effective when you see something directly related to it.
That's great. That's great. And you were very kind. You allowed us in the Blackstone Valley National Heritage Corridor to have a copy of the book for our library.
Well, I hope it inspires other people. And that was the reason for that. And I also thought it would help you when you go around interviewing people. It might bring to mind something that you could say to them to stir a memory. And those that you're interviewing, I know one of my mother's stories was about a Christmas and how they didn't have any money for decorations, so they took Lux Flakes and mixed it with water and made a paste to make it look like snow on the branches. And I just wonder how common a thing that might have been for someone to do that simple a thing to make their tree more attractive.
In those days, the only way of getting to a place like Millbury or Worcester or Whitensville was a streetcar. And the first thing they did Memorial Day, they'd take the sides off the cars, so it was an open-air car. That was the first thing they did every Memorial Day. And I was telling her how much more patriotic they were. They'd have parades, and I can see the men now, when the flag went by, they'd doff their hats. All the men.
When I was a kid, Memorial Day was a big deal, you know, especially Civil War people. And most of the kids I knew, their grandfathers were veterans, and I didn't have one, and that used to bother me. I couldn't brag about my grandfather being in the Civil War.
I used to have a program at school, and somebody would read the poem in Flanders Fields.
Yeah. In fact, you read it.
Yeah, I did read it one year. And then if they would have the monument, they would have a parade. But we always went, my father worked, doing police duty, but my mother and us children would go down to my grandfather's in Northbridge, and we always went down to the cemetery, and then came back to my grandfather's house and had a family picnic with their whole family, and my mother was one of, she had 11.
And the different Cape Verdean organizations in the city would have a mass, and from the mass, from the church, they would march to the cemetery, and at the cemetery, the priest would gather where the veterans were buried, the Cape Verdean veterans. They would call off the names of all the veterans who have died from the First, Second World War, the Vietnam War, Korean War, all the wars, and then they would have a gun salute to Cape Verdean veterans.
Well, this has been National Park Service Ranger Chuck Arning with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor. And the most significant aspect about learning the stories and the many cultures that call the Blackstone Valley home is the fact that while there are things that make us unique, there are many aspects of our stories that illustrate that we're all members of the same global family, and our stories reflect those connections. So share those family stories, celebrate in those cultural traditions, and embrace the concept that we all share some common threads.